Hey everyone, Crystal here from Leetcode. In today's videos, I will walk you through how to solve the valid palindrome problems from Leetcode. One of the most common string manipulations problems you will encounter in interview. I will break down the solution step by step and share some tips to help you ace the similar problems in the interview. Let's get started. First of all, in the first step, let's look at the problems and then asking some clarifying questions later on. Given a phrase is a palindrome if, after converting all uppercase letters into lowercase letters and removing all non-alphanumeric characters, us read the same forward and backward. Alphanumeric characters include letters and numbers. Given a string S, return true if it is a palindrome or return false otherwise. Before diving into codings, it is important to clarify the requirements. So what is a palindrome is? So a palindrome is a string just reading the same forward and backward. So for example, if you have Anna, then this one you can read the first A is equal to last A here, and this two N in the middle here is the same with each other. So this is the palindrome right here. In the string longer, it also need to be a palindrome as well. And then what characters should we consider? For example, one here, we will not consider a space or comma here or a colon here. And then we also have to lowercase all the characters in this string. After phasing out, we will just having this string. And then we will need to check whether this string is a palindrome or not. So as you can see on the example is covered the same like that. So another question that we can have in mind, then you can ask interviewer that, what if the string is covered like the empty strings? There's nothing inside it. What we have to return is the true or false. So let's see in here. If you scroll down in the constraints thing, you can see that the length of S is more than 1. Means that we cannot have the empty string. Kind of case we also have is if it's only a space like this. So if the space like this, when we phase it out, it's just like empty string. So with that empty strings, then it can be read the same way forward and backward. So it is palindrome as well. So we just return true in here. So we can understand the problem here. So the next step is matching the problem with the data structures or common pattern that you already learned in the past. For this problem, you will see that it's using a phrase like strings, palindromes, and the same forward and backward. So with these three keywords, point us out to what their common patterns is calling two-parters. So you can just remember that if it's involved a lot of string manipulations, so it can be solved with the common patterns called two-parter technique. Let's plan it out to see clearer about this technique. If we have the input string S is a man, a plant, a canal, Panama. So we will first do is we will have two-parter here. So this one is a parter 1, part of the beginnings of the string. And then we will have another parter is parter 2, is at the end of the string. So in here you can see the parter 1, part 2 uppercase A, and parter 2 is part 2 lowercase a at the end here. Parter 1 will go into this directions, and then parter 2 will go to this directions. So parter 1 will go to left to right, and then parter 2 its opposite is right to left. Lowercase all of it, then this would be A equal to A. Then we move the pointers to the next one. So parter 2 is at M here, and then parter 1 is at empty space here. When the parter 1 is empty space, then this is not the characters, so we will skip it. So we move the parter 1 to the next character as well. We have parter 1, part 2 M, and parter 2 is part 2 M as well. So M is equal to M, so we continue moving two parters toward the center. So parter 1 will move 1 point, and then parter 2 will move to 1 point here. So right now parter 1 is part 2A, and then parter 2 is also part 2A. So this two is the same, so we can just continue to the next one here. So now parter 1 is part 2N, and parter 2 is part 2N as well. So in here, when we have two parters equal, then we also move on. So in here you can see the parter 1 is part 2 of the comma, and comma is not a valid character to consider here, so we continue move the pointer 1 here. So when we move the pointer 1 in here, as there is space, and it's also not a valid character in here as well, so we continue move it. So from here, the character at pointer 1 is A, and then pointer 2 is also pointing to another A. So we know that these two characters is the same, so we continue moving. So pointer 1 is pointer to space now, and space is not a valid character in this case, so let's move on. Pointer 1 point next. So in here, pointer 1 is pointer to P, and pointer 2 is pointer to upper P, and we will lowercase everything beforehand. So P in here is calculated the same, so we continue moving these two pointers toward each other. So now pointer 1 is pointer to L, but pointer 2 is pointer to the space here. So we will move pointer 2 to the next one. So pointer 2 now is pointer to a colon, and colon is also not a valid character. We move to the pointer 1. So in here, pointer 2 pointer to L, and then pointer 1 is also pointer to L. So these two make it the same. So we continue move pointer 1 and pointer 2. So now pointer 1 is pointer to A, and pointer 2 is also pointer to A. So it's the same, so continue moving it. Now pointer 1 is pointer to N, pointer 2 is also pointer to N as well. So let's continue. Right now pointer 1 is pointer to the comma, and we not consider it. So continue going. And then this pointer 1 is pointer to space, so it's not valid either. So let's continue moving. So right now, this pointer 1 is pointer to A, and then pointer 2 is also pointer to A. Then we know that these two characters is the same, so we move the pointer 1 and pointer 2 as well. So it's really close together, but I will say it clearer. So pointer 1 is pointer to the empty space here, and pointer 2 in here, it actually pointer to character C. So with this one, pointer 1 pointer space here is not a valid character, so we will move pointer 1 to the next one. So in order to see it more clear, I will write it down here. So right now both pointer is pointer to character C. At the end, if it's not written false, then we can just return true. So this one is true. We can see another example that will return false for us. So for example here, we have S is race a car, and then we also will have pointer 1 is pointer to R at the beginning, and pointer 2 is pointer to R at the end. So in here, R is equal to R, so we continue moving forward. So pointer 1 is pointer to character A, pointer 2 also pointer to character A here. So let's continue to the next one. Here, pointer 2 is pointer to character C, pointer 1 is also pointer to character C. So let's continue move it forward. So now you know that characters at point 1 is E, but in character in pointer 2 is a space. We will move pointer 2 forward. So right now, character at pointer 1 is E, character at pointer 2 is A. So compare E to A, it is not the same, so we can just return false right away. So we can go through the plans for these two examples. One is return true and another return false. So we know that our solutions have potential here. We can just code it out. So for that, I will comment out this. So in here, I will code in Java, but I also provide the code in Python and JavaScript down in the description below. So please check it out if you're not familiar with Java. So for this, we will have two pointers. So to make it easier than pointer 1 and pointer 2, I will say as it's left, and then the left pointer here is at 0 at the start, and then the pointer 2, I will name it as right. Instead of putting 0 like the left, we will start at the end of the string. So we will have string s.length -1. So now we identify the left and the right pointer. we know that we need to write a while loop, and this while loop will end when these two pointers meet each other at the center. So in here, we will have is if left is still smaller than right. And then before we actually compare it, I think this is best to have like lowercase everything's inside this string, so we don't have to do its lowercase or its uppercase letters when we check the character. So in here, I call it S, and S in here, and dot to lowercase. So after we have that, we don't have to check character to lowercase later on when we check for the character. So now we have its own lowercase, and we have our while loop. So left character, this would be s dot char at our left pointer, and then another one is for the right character. So s dot char at the right pointer here. And in here, when we have left character and right characters, we will write in the while loop. So the first while loop in here is skipping for the left characters. So if the left character is a comma or a space, then we will skip it and move on to the next character. So first of all, checks whether this left is still have to smaller than the right. And then we need to check whether the characters is digit or is letters. So inside the characters class, we have the functions is letter or digit. So in here, you will pass in our left character. So once we have that, this one will check whether our left character is digit or letters. If it is not digit or letters, then we know that we need to increase our left pointers. And then we will do the same thing for the right pointers. So if the left pointer is still smaller than the right pointers, and in here, not, so the character is letter or digit here for the right character. So right now we clear on the edge case in here. Then we actually go to the main comparison. We would do a if statement. So if the left character is equal to our right character, then we know that it is true as palindromes, so we can just continue to the next one. But in here, we would writing opposites. So if the left character is not equal to the right character, so we know that we can just return false right away. So there's no point to check other things out. And then after we check all of that, we need to move both pointers toward each other. So here. So once all this y happens and we don't have any return false, then we know that it is a palindrome. So by the end, you can just return true in here. This is at the end of our coding here. After you finish codings, you have to go to the step is testing your solutions. So in the interviews, in some settings, there's no IDE that can run code like Leetcode here. So what you have to do in that case is you need to go through some example like I did in the planning step, and just go through each line in here to see whether this actually work with the example. If not, then we need to revise these solutions. But in here, we have the IDE for us already. So to save us some time, I just run this code here. So in here, we have false here. There's because I increase the left pointer, but we didn't really assign the left character here. So what we did in here is we have to check this one and then get this one into here as well. Okay, so after we do that, then just let resubmit it. So now as you see, everything is passed. It looks good for me right now. Let's just delete this part and then try to submit it to see if there is any edge case. Okay, so we get the accepted submissions. So this is how you will coding it out. So the last step we have to do is breaking down into time and space. The time complexity of this will be big of n, where n is the length of the string s here. Because we only have the while loop in here. And we also have the while loop in here, but us will kind of like skip on the left, and this one will skip on the right. And then overall, all of this, we just go through the characters in string s only one time. X character is processed as most once as a two-parter move from the both ends of the string toward the centers. So that should be it for the time complexity. And for space complexities, we have big of 1 since we don't have any variable extra. Since we only use a few extra variable this two-parter and just only some character here. So it's not complex regardless any input type, input size. So it will be big of 1. So this will ensure that our solutions is both efficient in terms of space and time. So that is how you solve the valid palindrome problems effectively. This step-by-step approach understands the problems, applying the right data structure, and testing thoroughly will help you not only with these problems, but with other string manipulation challenges as well. After I finish these problems, I usually come to this website, the Leetcode mate. So this one would have you to track on the problem that you did. In here, I will type in the names of the problem. So I did like 30 minutes ago, so just changing this one. And then for time stop is right now. And for category for this one, we know that it is a string problems. So I will put string here. And then in here, you can state your difficulties based on what you're feeling. Some problem is easy for other people, some problem is hard. So it really depends on what is your level is. So you can input it here. This will help you in your next problems. So, and then you can also enter the tip for your future self. So in here, you can type in like using two-parter for string manipulations problem. Okay. So after you write these tips, then you can just add problem here. And congrats, you finished working on these problems. Here you're checking your times that you practice. And then in here, you will see there's a category, string, and array. And then it will tell you how many days left until you need to redo the exercise in this category. So, and then if there is a button in here, you can see what is your next problem that you should do for this category. So now let's see it. So the next problem you should do is valid word abbreviations. So this one is also, and then the frequency of it is 96%. You can view the problem here or start working on this problem. And then here is preview most of the field, and you can just enter your time start and time end here. Right now we can just cancel it. And in here, you can see all the problems that you do and time practice. You can see which one is you need to practice more and which one you're already doing good. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to check out Leetcode Mate websites at the link below in the description for more interview prep resources. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell buttons for more tips on cracking the coding interview. Thanks for watching and best luck on your coding journey.